Alright, so since you guys said you wanted Grandmaster guides, and now that they're out, you're going to get them. Heads up everybody, my name is SentinelGray, and welcome to the channel. At first, I was going to show you guys my team's entire run through the Glassway, but then that would turn into a 45-minute long video, so I threw it out. But that doesn't mean I won't give you pointers as much as I can. First and foremost, the Glassway is without a doubt one of the hardest, if not the hardest Grandmaster in the entire game. So if you and your team can conquer this beast, you can conquer them all. To give you an idea and a little look into the future, during the boss encounter alone, you have to deal with 16 champions and 8 wyverns in total. It is not fun at all. So let's start with loadouts. During this strike, you'll be dealing with only Overload and Barrier champs, which means everyone on your team should be running one of those, but not all 3 of you run the same thing. Coordination is key here. Talk and discuss with your team what you all have at your disposal and see what would be fitted best for what. If you have somebody run a double primary, then there's no shame in doing that. I'd also recommend at least one of your team members bring the Breach and Clear mod from this season's artifact with either Anarchy or an easy to use grenade launcher with blinding nades. Witherhoard works too. If you have a truth teller with auto-loading holster and blinding nades, that'll work just as well. Next is you'll have to be dealing with arc and solar shields during this strike. Arc is going to be the big one here, with solar being the rare but important one. The solar shields only come on heavy shanks that spawn towards the end of the strike, but if you don't have anything to deal with the shields, then you're gonna be hurting for it. The heavy shanks kill you pretty quickly. I would also recommend having the protective light mod if you could fit it into your build here, because that thing can save your life in a pinch. And either put the double concussive dampener or double sniper protection on your chest piece so that you can tank some shots from either the final bosses or the snipers that you find throughout the strike. During my team's run, my team used 2 titans who were using Middle Tree Sentinel with Ursa Furiosa, so we could hold our barriers up for longer and produce enough orbs that we could feed a few hunters with Star Eater scales if we wanted to. Our third was a Warlock using Middle Tree Dawnblade with the Well, and Phoenix Protocol to make sure he had his well back before he even ran out of the first one he just placed. Now with that, I personally was running a True Prophecy with Overflow, Explosive Payload, and Overload rounds on them. If you don't know yet, if you have any weapon that has Explosive Payload or Timed Payload, you can proc Overload rounds at half the speed you would with the exact same weapon without the payload rounds. As my energy weapon, I used a Frozen Orbit with Lead from Gold and High Impact Reserves. This came in clutch when I was running low or looking for sniper ammo, but there was only heavy on the ground. And finally, I was using Anarchy, which, even without Breach and Clear, is a good option since you can use that as tick damage to just burn away some of the heavier enemies while you're not even paying attention to them. Everyone else on my team was also using Anarchy, but the other weapons differed. Toby was using a Night Watch with Rapid Hit and Explosive Payload, and a Frozen Orbit with Triple Tap and Vorpal Weapon. Meanwhile, Marty was using an Eye of Soul with Tunnel Vision and Vorpal Weapon, and changed from his Shadow Price out for a Vision of Confluence with Rewind rounds and Frenzy since we came across those solar shields and wiped as soon as we did on our first run. Now, general rule of thumb here for most, if not all, Grandmasters is to take it slow. Granted, if you end up hitting the 45 mark, the game eats all of your revives. But still, most of the time, you can deal with that if you hit the 45-minute mark during the tail end of the final boss fight. With how we did it, Toby and I were able to chain our banner shields back to back so that when one ran out, the other one would take over if need be. Just make sure if you do this to call out whenever you're at 25% energy left and count down from there. It's usually 5 seconds. While Toby and I were using that, Marty used his well as a fallback point for us just in case we were to screw up our timing or whatever. This isn't going to be needed during every fight in the strike, but it sure as hell is going to help if your team has the same composition as us and you need a little bit of breathing room. Something you should remember during this strike is that some of the fallen enemies, the mini-bosses that you'll find throughout the strike, have stasis, meaning that it applies to them the same way it applies to us. If you shatter their stasis crystals, they can easily one-shot you if you're close enough. Not only that, but the dusk-filled grenades can pull you out of cover just like yours can. Just keep your eye out for them. So more often than not, what my team did was focus fire on the mini-boss captains that appear and make them go away pretty quickly. I'd stun the Overload champion, then focus on the mini-boss so we didn't get bullied the entire time. After that, we'd shift focus on the champions, take them out as quickly as possible. If you ever get to a point where you have to deal with both an Overload champion and a barrier champion at the same time, it is better to try and focus on the barrier first, since the barrier champs here are servitors and can easily shield the Overload champs from any damage you can deal. Now, the place where you might first find some difficulty is whenever you have to drain the radiolarian fluid from the area in front of you. During this part, it's best to progress the plate by about 25% at a time, then back up and focus on the shanks, snipers, and heavy shanks that end up spawning. As long as your team uses the banner shield to chain to protect the group and make sure all of the enemies are killed before moving up to try to progress the plate, it shouldn't be that bad of a time. And if you don't have a banner shield, you can use the containers behind the plate in order to have cover so you can crossfire to kill all those enemies. This is also where you'll find your first and only solar shields on the heavy shanks. As long as you have someone to prioritize stripping their shields off and continuously damaging them so they don't get them back, it'll be smooth sailing. Once you reach the boss room, the real work starts. You have to kill a handful of Fallen and the single Overload captain, and the bosses will spawn in. The place we chose to hide out was on the left side of the map, inside to where neither of the bosses could really reach us. Well, I mean, the small one can, but depending on what you do with him, it might not be that bad. But it's unfortunate to say, the bosses aren't that big of a deal. What is a big deal here is dealing with the two Overload Minotaurs that will rush you and your teammates, so it's best to deal with them before anything else. The strategy here is to focus on killing the Minotaurs first, since they will easily wipe your team with one shot if you're not careful. After that, take care of any of the trash mobs that are out and about, like goblins or whatever. Once you clear the entire map of everything except the bosses, then it's safe to burn them down. Luckily, all of the enemies that spawn on the map hone in on you and your team, no matter where you are, so you won't have to go running around the entire map to see if you've killed everything. After you deal a little bit of damage to the bosses, another set of ads will spawn with a new set of champions and repeat the same thing you just did. This is a process you'll have to repeat a couple times. What I think triggers the next wave of ads and champs to spawn in is getting one of the bosses' health down by a sixth. Every sixth of their health, they will spawn new enemies and champions for you to deal with. The kicker is that the champions that spawn in also rotate. If you played this strike before, you know the bosses spawn in like waves of 4, or in 4 waves. First wave, they both spawn in and you have to both get them down to 2/3 health. The second wave will spawn the smaller one of the two, who you have to get down roughly 1/3 of its health. The third wave, you have to do the same thing with the bigger boss. And the final wave, you have to kill both of them outright. The first and third waves are the same as far as enemies are concerned. You have to deal with 4 Overload Minotaurs and a bunch of goblins. The second and fourth wave deals with 4 barrier hobgoblins, 4 wyverns, and a few harpies with arc shields. Keep that in mind. Do not underestimate any of these enemies or how they will come at you. I will say though, our saving grace seemed to be that the hobgoblins didn't really want to come into our space. They would often look in and try and maybe get some shots on us, but they never really pressured us or were being very aggressive. The Minotaurs, however, just did not want us there at all. Something else that was brought to my attention right before I finished this video, in fact, is that you can actually use blinding nades and blind the smaller Transcendent Hydra, the smaller boss, to keep it from attacking you and your teammates. This will help you if you ever need to take a break inside your room, or like while you're taking down damage on some of the champions or whatever. If you don't need it to attack you, this is a perfect way to get it to just bugger off for a bit. Like the rest of this strike, the key here is to be patient, and honestly, you can take as much time as you want as long as you stay alive and be careful. A perfect example is the first run that I did. We got to the boss room in a little under 20 minutes, and our time in the boss room was well over 25 minutes. Do not be afraid to take your time and do everything right. And if all else fails and you really have to get this done, just focus on the bosses. Like, what I mean by that is if there's just one of your fire team members alive and the boss is a sliver of health away from death and there are two hobgoblins still out there, or even one hobgoblin still out there, if your teammate can get a shot to kill the boss, then do it. The champions don't need to die in order for you to complete the strike. And honestly, in my opinion, I would be more worried about a completion as to more worried about the reward. Granted, yes, everybody wants to go for platinum rewards and get those adept weapons, but the Glassway is tough. You're going to have more chances to do that later on in the season. Just get this one done and out of the way. I'm telling you. At the end of the day, though, do not feel bad if you and your team wipes at the boss a couple of times. I know whenever I run GMs, it usually takes like 2 or 3 runs to really find a rhythm and know how to deal with each encounter as it comes. The teams I run GMs with almost never ever beat it first try, so don't feel bad about doing it either. If you have any questions that maybe I haven't covered in this video, please feel free to ask them either down in the comments below or by stopping by my stream every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll have a link for that so you can find me there on Twitch. But that is going to be it for me for today, guys. Thank you all very much for watching. I plan on doing these videos every week for the Grandmasters this season and continuing to do it down the line. Let me know if there's something that you think of that maybe I could change or switch around or whatever. I am open to suggestions. But thank you all for watching. I really do appreciate it. I will see you all next time. Remember, keep your heads up and be kind to each other. Bye now.